move on to this conference or this talk, which is about some experience report on how I was using Kanban metrics within the Scrum framework. So just before we move on that topic, I just want to present myself, who I am. So if I can move on to the next slide. This is me. In 2003, I used to work in Calgary, which is in Western Alberta. And after a few years, I moved back to Quebec City, where I organized the Agile tour in Quebec City. It's like an Agile day of conferences. It's pretty neat. And I think now there's around 80 cities around the world who are doing this. And a few years after that, or maybe in 2010, I decided to join Scrum.org as a professional Scrum trainer. In 2018, Scrum.org put in place a new class called the Professional Scrum with Kanban class, which I really like. It's the only class that I try to teach or advocate for because it has so much powerful tools in there to help our teams become better, and also the customers of those teams to have better forecasts on dates or delivery dates. So that's a little bit my professional journey. And now I'd like to move on to the real topic, which is going to be Kanban within Scrum, the framework. And something you guys should know, if I can draw here, you got those little comments at the bottom right. So you can click anywhere on that thing and type in comments. If it's questions, I'll try to ask Rohit to maybe put a bunch of questions together based on where we are in the talk. And also at the top, you can go to menti.com, punch in that code here, and I'll have little surveys as we move along, and we can interact, and I can get a feeling of the level of knowledge on specific questions that I'll be asking during the conference. All right, moving on. So just before we talk about Kanban within the Scrum framework, I want to refer to the Kanban guide for Scrum team, which has now been out, I believe, for around 2 years. And in there, there's a really good definition of Kanban. And that's the one I'd like to show you on the next slide, which is Kanban is a strategy for optimizing the flow of stakeholder value through a process that uses a visual work in progress limited pull system. So for the rest of this conference, when I'm going to refer to Kanban, this is going to be my definition. It's going to be a strategy that I'm going to use within the Scrum framework. So if you can think about another strategy to move work into an iteration, would just be with post-it and moving tasks. Well, Kanban is going to be another way to move that work or have that work flow within the Scrum framework. And one good piece of that Kanban guide for Scrum team that I love is the Kanban metrics. So there are 4 Kanban metrics in the Kanban guide for Scrum teams. The first one is going to be cycle time. You'll have work in progress, throughput, and finally work item age. And during this talk, we'll go through all of them, and I'll try to share what I've done by using each one of them in my teams. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is I'm going to see if there's actual value of using Kanban metrics inside a Scrum team. So maybe you're actually using story points and velocity with your teams, and you might not get the real value out of those practices. So the first part of this talk here is to see if you would get a different kind of reading from your team productivity with cycle time. So before we move forward by comparing cycle time and story points together, I just like to give you the definition of cycle time based on that Kanban guide for Scrum team, which is the amount of elapsed time between when a work item starts until it finishes. So if we refer this to a sprint backlog, well, my cycle time will be when something gets into the ready column and it moves all the way to the done column. That's going to be my cycle time for my next examples. So in this example of a sprint backlog, I'm going to count the cycle time from the point it starts in the ready column all the way to the done column. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to plot those stories that I'm completing with the story points. So I'm going to put on my x-axis here the story points that we fairly know for about 15 years. Lots of teams I've worked with have put story points at the bottom here with 1 point on stories that are easy, a 2 point, and 3 pointers. Medium difficult stories are 5 pointers, and you might have harder ones at 8 or 13. And you know what the general consensus is, well, we're going to plot things here and you should have some kind of a few days to complete a story. So for this example here, a 5-point might take 12 days. And in theory, what we should have is some kind of distribution of, well, a 5-pointer will be bigger than a 3-pointer here. So I would have maybe some 5-point stories around that range of cycle times. And for 1-pointers, they should be smaller and they should be smaller in cycle times. And for 8 points, well, it's bigger. So you should have a range higher than 5. So they should have a bigger cycle time. That's the logic that I've been teaching for 10 years. Until I meet some really smart folks in the Kanban community, which helped me realize that, gosh, once I've done this analysis in my teams, it looks a lot more like this. And what I'm going to show you is what I'm getting in about 90% of the teams I've been working with in the last 2 years is those 1-pointers, 2 points, and 3-pointers are generally around the same spread in cycle times. And in this case, hey, I've got a few 5 points. They're also in there. And guess what? In this example, which is real data that I've picked up from a team of last year, my 8 points are still within that same range. So this makes me wonder, am I getting real value out of those story points, estimations to make forecasts, or can I use cycle time, which is really going to be a historical value, and can I do something with that that's going to be more accurate for my team and for my customer? So question 1 for the audience, have you ever compared story points of completed items with the actual time it took to complete them? So now's your time to shine. You can go either on your mobile or on that menti.com into another tab and answer that question. I'll give you maybe 30 seconds to answer that poll. And I believe I've got about, what, 20 people, Rohit, in this meetup?
Yeah, 27.
All right, so I'll wait until maybe 20 people here will answer. So it's going to force everyone to come back to my talk now and give their answers. So it's kind of interesting here that for the 10 people who have answered, there's around half and half. So half the people have done it and the other half hasn't. So it's kind of interesting that not everyone has done that. So I might want to invite you folks who haven't done it to try it out to see if you are getting the real value of those story points and velocity. And if not, well, the next part of this presentation will be, what can I do with that cycle time then? So going back to cycle time, we're going to look at how we can use cycle time to forecast and follow one item in your sprint. So on this new chart here, on the x-axis, I'm going to have dates, which is going to be the history of my project or my team. So here on March 5th, I had one story point bug, a product backlog item to keep it generic, and it took 12 days to be completed. So what I'm going to say is, my first point is going to say on March 5th, it took 12 days to complete this item. I can also look back at another day. Oh, I went too fast here. On this other day here, which is on February 12th. Yes, on February 12th, I've got 2 items which were completed on that day. My team completed something which took 9 days and another item here that took 4 days. Cool, this is fun. So we're actually going to plot the history of the work being done by this team. And after a few weeks, after a few months, you'll get this cloud of points, this scatter plot of points. And looking at this data, you might be wondering, well, what can I do next? And what we're going to do is we're going to draw a new y-axis on the right, which is going to be the percentile. And the percentile axis is really a way of saying, well, if I've got 50% of my points, where would that be? So I'm going to draw a line of my 50% percentile, and it's going to tell me that I've got 50% of my done items under 6 days. So I could say that in 50% of my items being completed by a team, it's taking them 6 days or less. So if my product owner would ask me, Louis, I've got this new story here. This team is going to start working on it today. What is the chance that it's going to get completed in 6 days? And I could answer him or her, well, you've got a 50% chance of confidence or probability that you'll get that done in 6 days or less. When I get this conversation with my PO, he's going to say, 50% is too small. Can you increase that level of confidence? I can surely do that, sir. I'm just going to draw a new percentile line. This one is going to be at 75%. So 75% of my data is underneath that percentile line. And now we're at 9 days or less. So for my product owner who's asking, when will this story be done? I can tell him, you've got a 75% chance that it's going to be done in 9 days or less. And usually they go like, I'm getting more comfortable, but I need a little bit more confidence. Not a problem, sir. And based on my experience for the last 2 years, I found that the sweet spot is at 85%. So at 85% of the time, this team delivers items in 12 days or less. It doesn't mean it's going to be on 12 days, but it's going to be 12 days or less. So the first value of that cycle time compared to story points / velocity is to use that historical data to answer the question of the customer, when will it be done? So we get a new metric also, which is going to be called the service level expectation, the SLE, which according to the Kanban guide for Scrum team is the time it should take given an item to flow from the start of your sprint backlog, all the way to finish within the Scrum team's workflow. So what I like about this SLE, for example, I've got my 8 days or less here in 85% of the time. Well, the advantages of this is we're talking about a period of days. Isn't that wonderful for a customer who doesn't have to translate that into points? We're talking about days. Everybody knows about days, and it's about elapsed days. So this means that we're also including weekends, vacations, holidays. So that's something else to keep in mind. Also, we're talking about a probability. We're not talking about a fixed date, and that might be a little bit tough for some people, but at the same time, I have a hard time predicting the future. Who would have thought 12 months ago that we were doing in this situation worldwide? Not a lot of people. So if you know how to predict the future, please contact me. I would have some great business opportunity for you. Otherwise, I'm going to express the future in terms of probability. And I find that the percentile line that you've just seen is a great way of doing that very easily in your teams. And finally, oh, we missed the last one. Well, it's in the advantages. It's based on historical data, so I'm not going to talk about estimates here. I'm going to embed delays within those cycle times. So if there was outages, production bugs, they're included in the cycle times of your historical data, which is great compared to estimations, which you are always kind of trying to guess. And finally, well, it might even replace planning poker, because at your refinement meeting, you could use the SLE as a way to say, can we do this in 8 days or less or not? Compared to saying if it's a 5-point or 3-point or 2-point. And finally, well, it's a language that the customer can understand. All right, and any questions here, Rohit? Is there anything before I move on to the next section about cycle time and story points?
Not yet, yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you everybody then to keeping along with me. The second part of this talk is about arrival and departure rate, where we're going to talk about throughput. So what I want to talk in this section is this nice chart here, where we've got the historical time here, the time value of your team on the x-axis, and then on the y-axis is going to be completed items in your team. So where I'm going with this is I'm going to have a slope for throughput, which is going to be my average completion rate. So you've got a slope here for throughput. And let's say that our arrival rate, so the number of items coming into your sprint backlog, looks a little bit different. It's quite more steep here than your throughput. So what does this mean is, I'm going to show you the next slide. Well, at this time here, I had a work in progress of X number of items because these are just items here that are not completed. They're being worked on. So as I move forward in time, I'll get a cycle time for that item here that's pretty long. But if we go back in time, and I'm going to show it this way, well, if we go back in time when we maybe start our project when we have very little WIP, our cycle time was lower. We were going faster. So if our slopes are not equal, well, as you move forward, your work in progress will get bigger and your average cycle time or approximate average cycle time will get bigger, which is all about limiting work in progress. And I've seen a lot of Scrum Masters focusing more on limiting the work in progress of a column. Where I want to take folks here is not on a column, well, on one column in particular, and it's going to be the ready column. It's not going to be the in development column or the in review column. It's going to be the ready column or the first column of your sprint. So what happens if you've got two slopes which are perfectly in line? Well, if I've got a work in progress here at the beginning of a project of, let's say, 10 items, well, 2 weeks later, that if you work on getting that same WIP, well, your cycle time will stay mostly the same thing. So the big improvement that I've done with using Kanban within the Scrum framework is of applying a WIP limit on the ready column or the first column of your sprint backlog equal to your throughput. So if you're completing 10 items per sprint, you should take 10 items into your sprint. So the big rule in there is have the WIP limit of the ready column based on the team throughput. Questions from the audience before I show an example of how I've done this?
Yes, we got a couple of questions. One from Jawahar. How do you establish SLE for newer teams without any history?
Try with something. Let's shoot for try something. Like let's say, okay, let's try 5 days or less. Can we do this within 5 days or less? Or if you've got more complexity or a domain that's more difficult, maybe bump that value to 8 or 10 days or less. And it only takes you 12 data points or 12 completed items to then get a fairly stable value for your 85th percentile. I can send a link to Rohit after on my website. I've got the little demonstration that helps you understand that.
Thank you. Next question is from Sami. Does this mean we should story point stories based on number of days required only, not complexity and efforts?
I wouldn't, if you are not getting value from story point, I would move that aside and start counting cycle time.
Sami, is that answer? You have anything you want to elaborate on that question? You can unmute yourself, Sami.
Yeah. So the question is, if cycle time isn't it same as the number of days it's going to take for someone to finish the story? So I will estimate something like 8 story points because it will take me 3 days to complete that story. And that's also the cycle time, right?
No, scrap estimate. When I'm talking about cycle time is start a timer when you start working on that card all the way until it gets to done or whatever is your last column in your workflow. Completely ignore estimates.
So you're saying that's different, like both will be definitely different because one is estimation and one is the actual thing that happened.
Exactly. So that's why I would be more advocating historical data to make decisions. And when you go back to the Scrum framework, it's all based on empiricism, on facts. And I prefer using real historical data for facts compared to estimates, which, yes, there are facts, but they're estimates at the same time.
Okay, got it. Yeah, thank you.
So here's an example of managing flow in a team. I had a team for maybe 4 months. It had no real team member changes. They were doing 1 week sprints because they were mostly a ops teams. They're DevOps, but they're doing mostly 30% of dev and 70% of ops. And that's based on the nature of their stories that they were completing every week. And the nature of their work wasn't really changing. They were a core team for a product line. So for the whole time I was with them, and even before my time with them, the team didn't change, the nature of the work didn't change, and they were mostly operating within 1 week sprint. So I want to show some of data of that team, and this is a big grid here, so I'll try to help you go along. So for 2018, these are the first 8 months of that team, and I've registered before I got here with them. I registered their average arrival rate per month and their average departure rate per month. I've looked at their average work in progress for each month and their average cycle time for each month. So I'm looking at this, and there wasn't a lot of correlation between what was coming in and what was coming out. Scrum Master was actually there, just, was not really leading them into that direction, as he was just not aware that we should maybe limit the work in progress in the ready column. So overall, they had 2 items that they were they were putting into their sprint backlog every day, and they were completing 2 items every day. And they had 27 items, an average of 27 items in their sprint backlog workflow, and their cycle time, their average cycle time was 18 days. So the only thing I did during my time with them in the fall of that year was to limit that work in progress on that ready column. So all I did was, hey, if they're doing 2 items per day, they're completing 2 items per day, let's put a WIP limit of 10 on that ready column. So yes, 10, a WIP limit of 10. So what happened in that fall? Again, for that same team, by just limiting the work in progress in the ready column, well, their WIP started going down. I've limited their work in progress. Cycle time started to go down. And oddly enough, as things were going faster, if you look a little bit at the arrival rate and departure rate, it's starting to increase. So I went from like this, squeeze the lines like this, and then the line started going up like this. So let's compare both data, all the data points together at the same time. So before, when we didn't really know what we were doing on limiting work in progress, we had 2 items coming in per day and 2 items coming out with a work in progress of 27 and a cycle time of 18. Just by applying a WIP limit on the ready column based on the throughput, numbers started to increase. WIP limit went down, cycle time went down. And what I like about those Kanban metrics is I'm taking decision based on facts, which is something I find that not enough people in our profession know about all those nice metrics to take decisions or facts on what to move forward with our team. This is I think, the beauty of the Kanban guide for Scrum teams. There's a lot of info around the metrics on your historical data. Question to the audience. Who does this kind of analysis to help you limit your work in progress? So time to go back to your mobile, punch in that code at the top, and get some input in there. All right, I still have about a dozen people are still on board. Thank you everyone for staying with me here. So yeah, a lot less of yes in there. Interesting. It's interesting to see that there was more analysis around the story point versus cycle time, but this other way to approach work in progress is not as well known as the other one. So I think as a profession, we still have a lot to learn about applying this to help our teams be more productive with their customers. And the last metric that I want to talk about is the work item age. So for how long are your items in your workflow? So the first place where I use my work item age is in my sprint backlog workflow. What you are seeing here is a sprint backlog workflow of a team that I've used to work with, which has 4 columns: ready, in progress, in review, and pending deployment. And these are all dots representing stories being worked on during my sprint, in my sprint backlog. And on the far left here, you've got the age of my items. So how many days are they in the sprint backlog? And on the far right here, guess what? I've got my famous percentile line that we saw earlier with my SLE of 85%. So a new conversation I could have at my daily scrum is, well, I could have a conversation around items which are above my 85% line, because these are, I'm going to say, outliers, or they're going above my service level expectation, which was in this case, I believe it's incorrect, but I think it's at 40 or 30 days. So during a daily scrum, I could have this new conversation about what are we which item is gonna beat our SLE, so that we can manage maybe some blockers or some stale stuff to get that thing moving again. I've also used the age of my product backlog items in my product backlog. You've got here a really rudimentary product backlog, which is just a column, which is called the to-do column. And I've got lots of stuff in there, which are just product backlog items that are lying in there for a couple of years. Like you're seeing here, all of this stuff here is probably older than a year. So that's another conversation that I have with my product owner maybe once a month of, let's do some cleanup in that product backlog on really old stuff, if there's still value in looking at them. If you've got some interest from your product owner, you might want to stretch your product backlog list and turn it into a product backlog workflow. So in this situation, I've worked with a team which went from one to-do column and decided to say, you know, I've got a to-do room, which is just stuff, ideas that I've got pending. And when I know that I've got an idea that I want to work on, where there's some technical review on it, and then there's maybe some candidates on things that I want to do before throwing them into the sprint backlog, then people can start working on it. So by stretching your product backlog from a list to a workflow, you can start monitoring the age of those items, and even asking your question, a question about, is your product backlog, would it make sense to have a service level expectation on that product backlog, for example? So checking the age of items in the product backlog, well, it could be a practice that you could do in a refinement meeting, maybe once a month. That's something that has been helpful for me once a month. I do it once a month, and sometimes I look at the SLE to see if it makes sense. I don't think the jury is out yet on if there's value of looking at the SLE, but I find it's interesting to see with your product owner and maybe your business people, does it make sense that I have maybe a 50 days, 85% of the time or less, SLE for product backlog items? Or is it even higher than 50 days? Is it 90 days or less, 85% of the time? Does that make sense as a business to have things move really slow in your product backlog, and then asking your development team to go really fast on those items? So that could be another conversation you can have with your product owner and your business people. And finally, the advantages of using the age of items in your sprint backlog. Well, I do it actually once per week. If I do it every day at every daily scrum, I've discovered that I'm bugging my team more than anything else. They really want to use that daily scrum to focus and synchronize on their work. So on a Monday, I'll probably look with the team on things that are getting old and are going to beat the service level expectation. But on the rest of the week, I'm not really going to bother them with that age stuff. So it's early in the week, and we try to identify stale or block items early in the week so that we can act on it. So we are almost at the end, Rohit. I want to share the brain approach with everyone here. It's something that I really like. If you've liked the content of this talk, I like to use a brain approach when I see something new. Is, well, could I have benefits when I'm going to try to put this into practice? What would be the benefits of trying Kanban metrics within the Scrum framework? Is there any risk? Is the current situation at my workplace not a good time to apply this? So maybe it's risky to apply those metrics right now where you are working. Is there any alternatives? For example, maybe the no estimate movement or solution might be another way to look at at your problem? And what is your gut feeling? What is your intuition based on what you've seen today? Do you think it's something that you could apply? And finally, well, maybe you just want to do nothing. You've seen this and you might say, well, velocity, story points, this is a good approach for me. I'm just not going to move forward with these Kanban metrics. So we are at the end of the talk. I'm going to do a shameless plug, Rohit. I'm going to plug pacemaker.ca. It's a website that I'm going to launch later on this fall. But if you folks are curious, this is where I'm going to put content, articles, so people can understand better. I'm going to put spreadsheets to so people can understand how to do those metrics within the spreadsheets. Later on this fall, there's going to be tools like a Monte Carlo simulation tool so that you can try to do forecast with Monte Carlo simulations. So keep in note that website is going to get it's going to have more and more content in the next few months. So thank you, everyone. This is going to be the comments page. So once again, you can go on the menti.com app and you can type in comments directly in there, and participants will see those comments showing up. I'm more than happy to hear what people have to say. And if there's any questions, Rohit, I'm more than happy to answer as the best I can any questions that people will have.
There's no question in the chat. So if somebody wants to add, they can raise their hands or put their names in the chat. So then you can unmute yourself and ask the question.
Rohit, I would have a question to Louis-Philippe.
Sure.
So I come from a very lean manufacturing background, and so concepts from operations such as cycle time and lead time are used not to optimize the work of machines and people, but also to try to get more insights into where do we have inefficiencies, where do we have invisible work, where we have unplanned work, and a lot of ways that we can get more insights into how our teams really operate. And so my question to Louis-Philippe is this: using those analysis, those visualizations that he produces, did he derive, or did you, Louis-Philippe, sorry, did you derive ways or best practices or tactics or even heuristics that allowed you to, depending on how the team operates, already identify optimization potential, inefficiency removal potential, etc.?
What an awesome question. Short answer would be no. Yep, short answer would be no. And the short answer would be no. I don't know what else to say except that it's giving me ideas, but short answer is no. If I can elaborate a little bit, I think this is such new material or practices for the Scrum community or the IT community that we haven't even scratched the surface on just the basic metrics of Kanban within Scrum teams. And hopefully one day we can get where you are describing, hopefully, in IT and in Scrum teams. Does that answer a little bit your question?
Yeah. I mean, I've been having this discussion because I've taken a sabbatical year this year just to think about these kind of problems in Lean IT, and that's my main goal this year. So I knew that it was not, I would have been surprised if you had a ready-made answer. But Rohit, please stop me if I take over or hijack the discussion. But if you allow, I'd like to ask a follow-up.
No, it's fine. It's for everyone anyway. It's not for me or anyone.
Right.
So you all are here to ask any questions. Yeah. So if anyone else has any questions, then please, go ahead. Yeah.
All right. So I'll see if nobody hijacks me. So Louis-Philippe, my follow-up would be, taking your answer into account, is I heard from the talk that there is this implicit hypothesis that limiting work in progress, getting insights on our average on SLEs, etc., would allow us to remove a lot of the obvious waste. Right? We get to the core velocity and the core efficiency of the team. And there are many other factors such as how the team is organized, how the team communicates, the estimation, experience, and maturity of the team. There is a ton of variables, and their importance and the focus that people put on will vary from team to team. Did you, in all your analysis and all your work with other projects, with different clients, did you already derive some hints or intuition as to what are the factors that are internal to the team that would that you would have to act on to improve their metrics, those 4 metrics metrics that you shown. So the cycle time, the work in progress, the average age, and I forgot the last one.
Throughput, cycle time.
Yeah, throughput. Did you derive at least a set of usual suspects to first look at when you want to dig deeper and see what you can work on to to understand how the team really operates and why it generates those numbers you have on your Excel sheets?
You're right. You're right. That kind of makes more sense. I look a lot. I lean back a lot on Little's law, which is something we haven't talked for the last hour. And so limiting work in progress will usually be my first target of how much work is the team taking on into, and have we found a good sweet spot at limiting that work in progress? Most of the time, the answer is no. So to answer your question, limiting work in progress would be usually my first area from a Kanban perspective with a team.
Okay, so I understand that if you keep on doing your work, you will probably identify other suspects to look at other than limiting work in progress based on all your analysis.
Yeah, and then there's tons of other variables like for team culture or culture of the organization. Do we only have internal employees or consultant? And then there's all of other things. But from a Kanban perspective, usually limiting work in progress is going to be my first area to look at. Also, maybe looking at forecast. If I've got a lot of budget, project manager people buzzing around the team, should I get some kind of forecasting tool to help answer those questions if that's something important? If work is not getting out, also I'm going to use the age of items to see how come they're not coming out. So maybe even replacing complementary practices like subtask or task, people put hours on. Can we just change that and follow the age of items? So I'll try to juggle around all those concepts.
All right, I'll stop here.
Hi. So I have a question. So this has kind of been like a question of mine. So in the Agile world, we have so many methodologies, so many metrics, so many things. Like we have Scrum, we have SAFe, we have Kanban. So like everyone says mine is the best, mine is the best. So how, because Kanban is it's more hands-on for Scrum Masters, it's more hands-on for everybody. So I guess maybe as a Scrum Master, how do you implement Kanban with SAFe? Because SAFe is on the rise right now. I think every organization wants to use SAFe, and with PI planning and everything. So how do you implement Kanban with these other methodologies that are coming up, especially SAFe?
Ooh, I don't know. Honestly, I have my SAFe certification. I haven't done any SAFe project yet, so I could not.
Same as I understand. Yes.
I could not share. One maybe selling point when I gave this a similar talk to this one 3 months ago, and one thing that might be there was a SAFe practitioner asking, can we use these Kanban metrics and with multiple teams? And my answer was yes, this is fairly easy of using the throughput of 5 teams, which are just working on one big thing. It's so much easier than doing all this estimation techniques from SAFe, which is still, locking some variables. I think the Kanban throughput / Monte Carlo approach on some SAFe practices would get some traction, I believe. And that's a great conversation that maybe just the SAFe community should hear a little bit more about the Kanban guide for Scrum team.
Yeah, I know now they've implemented Kanban, but I still didn't really see how they were going to do it because it's right now in the SAFe. In the new SAFe, they do have Kanban. So it's just more of a question of how do we implement Kanban with SAFe. But thank you, Louis.
No problem.
I've got one question. I think. So is these metrics more suitable to more system teams or like DevOps or any of the infrastructure teams, or have you tried with the development team as well, these metrics?
Yes, I've tried them with a maintenance team and development teams. They work very well for both kind of situations. Once again, Kanban is a strategy, if I go back to definition, to deliver value to customers by using a visual, limited work in progress pull system. So they work the same way either in a dev environment or a maintenance environment.
Thank you. Okay, there's a question from Amani. Can these agile metrics be used for work items involving data science?
Work item, what was the last part of that question, Rohit?
So can these agile metrics be used for work items involving data science?
Data science. What are
Yeah.
data science?
Amani, you want to elaborate, please? You can unmute yourself.
Yeah, hi. So data science, working with data scientists and data engineers, data science lifecycle. So it's very much exploratory, and they work with, data and gaining insight into data and manipulating it, pipelining it, and then working with software developers. It's very different to the SDLC, so software development lifecycle. So I was just wondering, because I am working with a big team involving both data scientists and engineers, and then your typical software engineers or software developers. I'm kind of finding it hard to kind of get them on board with working off the same story, if you will. But I was just wondering if, I mean, these metrics I've worked with before, and they work well with just software developers, but combining data scientists as well. I was just wondering if you've tried that.
No, no. But if you do, please do contact me. I'd love to do some kind of experience report or learn about your experience.
Will do. Thank you.
Thank you. And while I was hearing your questions, I want to go back to a previous question about have I codified or put some stuff in writing about things that I've done. I've put a lot of knowledge that I have about doing this, like for example, throughput-driven sprint planning on scrum.org. There's a couple of blogs from me in their blog post on things that I've tried in regards to Kanban within the Scrum framework. So if you're looking for maybe more guidance or knowledge, do hit the scrum.org blog and look under my name. There's a couple of articles in there that I've written. Shameless plug once again, but to help the community. It's really to help you folks.
Thank you. Thank you, Luis. Any other question, anyone?
I can ask several follow-ups to my earlier questions, which are about the initial discussion in your presentation, Louis-Philippe, was about it was a hidden hint as to the misleading focus on story points, etc. And we know all the discussion about the fact that these numbers are easily manipulated, etc. Does that kind of analysis that you're doing with teams allow you to let them understand how they evaluate complexity? It's always a big topic, that's what I meant earlier by communication. So how, as a team globally, they evaluate complexity of tasks, no matter if it's, let's say, data science or any other task, it's just this, or did it allow them to learn how to better decompose tasks into, let's say, optimal / close to optimal sizes of tasks? Let's say 5 story points to 10 story points is something I can usually always finish in the time that I forecasted, versus if I do something beyond 10 story points, it's likely it's going to stay in my backlog for 6 months. That's kind of insights.
This might not be, I'm not going to answer your questions correctly. I feel as I just scrap this whole estimation conversation. I just scrap it. I don't want to have it anymore. It's useless. It doesn't add any more value for me.
Yeah, I get that hidden. Sorry.
It's more about educating my teams and my customers and having conversation with other professionals like you of, well, what is cycle time, so that these folks in the teams can understand it, and what is work item age, so that they can monitor their work in progress based on their own historical data. And once I start having that conversation, there's no more scapegoat, I think that's the word in English, or blame game on, oh no, estimations aren't good and it's just stupid story points. This all goes away because we're talking about their actual work, and that's a little bit confronting for them. And at the same time, it reassures them that, okay, there's no more bullshit about all this stuff. This is how we are operating. And at retrospectives, well, we can talk about those numbers if they make sense or not, because maybe throughput is going down, and maybe that's just normal because the last items that we've completed, they were big chunks of work. So their cycle time was just higher. So this whole conversation about, well, is velocity going down? Well, we can expand on that and saying, well, okay, throughput is going down, and that's because there's bigger chunks of work coming in. They're not small pieces. They just have to work on bigger parts right now for next month. So cycle time will go up, throughput will go down, and then let's just keep track on that.
I think there is a misunderstanding in terms of the question, but I'm very familiar with this discussion. It's been going on for over 15 years. That's not my point. My point is, well, if you try to predict the future just based on the past, anybody will tell you, no, I don't want to do it. I mean, I've been doing technology strategy work for about 10 years, and the board was to say, okay, we can work with those numbers, but that's not an accurate prediction to the future, because let's just say we have a new product, a new team, or we have a new type of test that we're working on. They will only accept it if you tell them, well, this is highly to mildly repetitive work, so we can take the assumption that our estimates are going to be quite correct. So we can use the past as a helper to predict the future. But if it's highly innovative work, let's say you are in a unit where you do 2 or 3 design sprints to produce new innovative features that you want to test on the field, and they have to deliver them, and the sprints are 3 times 1 week sprints, etc. That's the exact opposite on the other spectrum, sorry. And it's highly chaotic. It's almost impossible to do any prediction based on past performance, if you get what I mean. That's why I asked this question about whether or not it allowed you to get any insights as to how well do people cut work in pieces / how accurate their estimates were. I didn't ask if they should use story points to estimate their, etc. So I could summarize: doing what you do, did it allow you to gain any insights as to how well do these teams accurately estimate the effort that they plan for?
My short answer would be no, as we're just not focusing on estimates anymore.
All right, got it. Thanks.
Thank you for your question.
But can I ask a follow-up question? How do you do a release planning in this model if you're not doing estimation? Because you might have so much of variance unless you go and break down into. I know averaging would work over time, but if you're looking at a short term, your average may not help actually, and you won't have a breakup of having similar sized work. And how would you do a forecasting?
Sure, that's a great question. I still got 9 minutes. So this is data from one of my team that I've loaded in a tool called Actionable Agile. I highly recommend using that tool if you want to apply Kanban metrics. So this is the throughput serve from that team from early 2018 all the way to the end of 2018. And it's number of items that they are completing per week. So for example, on this week here, they completed 23 items. And this week, that week of September here, it's only one item because they were at an offsite. So not a lot of people were working. They were mostly doing team building stuff. And the green line in there is their rolling average based on the last 10 weeks. So we can see that from early 2018 all the way to the end, their throughput is getting higher. So for the next sprint, and they're doing a one week sprint, people would ask me, well, how many items would we take in the sprint backlog? Well, we could say we're going to take 20. Now your question, sir, is, well, for a release, which is maybe 1 quarter ahead, how will I do this? Because it might still change. That throughput is going to change maybe. And so we just don't want to take one reading. So we're going to do some Monte Carlo simulation in there. So I'm going to pick my same timeline here at the top. And I'm going to say, well, from August 11th here, and my release planning, my release is going to be in 3 months. So at the end of December, just before the holidays, on Friday the 18th. And I've got 10,000 trials or simulation based on that throughput. And it tells me here that to complete at the end of the year in 129 days, I'm going to just take my marker to help everyone. So at the end of the year in 129 days, there's a 95% probability that this team will do 227 items based on their historical data with that throughput. Let's say that this is too risky for you because I don't know what you've got a bigger product backlog. Well, what if we would scale, we would add a couple of people in that team. So there you go. I've scaled that throughput because I might have some 2 or 3 new developers, and I've increased that 95% from 227 to 343 items that would be completed at the end of the year. So for me, Monte Carlo is really good to do forecasting per quarter, while the throughput run chart that you've seen is pretty good to do forecasting for the next sprint or two. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it gives a way, but I'm still thinking how it is going to impact certain behaviors. For example, it really depends upon how well your team or the product owner is good at putting a backlog item, isn't it? Because if instead of 300 items, you can put the same on 50 list, and it's going to give a different analysis. It's how you break it down.
This is great. These are great tools to enable you to have this conversation. You can start with Mr. Product Owner or Mrs. Product Owner, and if you don't keep them small, or if you don't do a lot of refinement, these dates might not be accurate. So you've got a responsibility as a product owner to also work on your items correctly. These are a great conversation to have. Is if you want to meet those dates based on those simulations, you've got some kind of accountability in there to do. So I find them great.
You're right. So don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to. So here, see, in this, what happens is you're getting into the same conversation, which is important. Whether you do planning poker or do cycle time, the conversation is the important part on the team, doing the refinement, getting the views shared across, and either ways, you're going to end up in the same results. So what is the benefit of changing some practice and introducing cycle time?
I'm using historical data versus estimations. That's my key point.
You would do the same thing with the planning, with the story points as well, isn't it? You would use historical data. You would be using historical velocity.
It's going to be estimates based on estimates.
Yeah, that's right. You see, the cycle time is established based on history. So team has to work on that information. Similarly, for story points, it's established by the team. So it's historical data. For new teams, you're going to assume in both the cases.
And after 12 data points, I can go and plug a pacemaker here. After only 12 data points or completed items, you'll have enough information to do your forecast. Your 85% will be valid after only 12 data points.
Okay. Have you seen any project using just cycle time, whatever you were told, and been successful?
Please look at Daniel Vacanti, Ultimate Software in Florida, at Agile Conference 2012 or 2014. He had an awesome experience report on doing this. I highly recommend you folks check Daniel Vacanti work. This used to be his tool that you're seeing right now. Daniel Vacanti is a leading authority on all of those metrics, and I can just highly recommend that you folks check his work.
Okay.
I've become a better professional by reading Daniel Vacanti.
Okay, thank you.
Spell his last name, please. Daniel.
Yes, Vacanti. Daniel, that's not coming straight. Vacanti.
I just put in the chat. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we are in the time now. So thank you very much, everyone. And special thanks to Louis for amazing talk. And obviously we had quite interactive session this one. So hope everyone got something and then try out. So thanks everyone. I'm going to stop the recording now. Yeah, so we can